Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey John, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing well.
I am doing well. It's pollen's not getting too bad yet. There's been enough rain to wash it away, so tough to complain.
We have had a lot of rain. There is absolutely no doubt. And I'm looking forward to this week's podcast. Last week we talked a little bit about some of the trends and perhaps some of the causes for income inequality and maybe poverty here in the United States. We really kind of touched most significantly on structure of the household, educational attainment, and then also whether or not people worked. Clearly, if you aren't working, you have less income coming in. So it's not surprising at all that the poorest households in the United States tend to be where there are a bunch of people living in the house and no one's working.
Yep.
Conversely, the wealthiest households in the United States are those where they aren't a lot of people living in the house and everyone's working. And so
Yep.
that's not
Pretty straightforward.
that's not terribly surprising. One of the things I also wanted to point out that we didn't have enough time to really delve into it last week is also in regards to educational attainment, the types of degrees and the types of skills that people are getting as well will impact their income over time. It just makes sense that social workers and people getting social work degrees will make less money coming out of school and, intuitively in their career than someone who's, say, a chemical engineer. Or
Sure.
Someone who goes to medical school will make more money over time than someone that graduates with an English degree or something along those lines. So there's a lot of that out there as well. So, but even so, we're going to move onward and upward. We're going to move forward. Last week, maybe some of the trends and causes. And this week, we're going to talk about why it matters. What are some of the effects of income inequality? Why is everyone so terribly concerned about it, and what is its overall impact here in the United States? And Sam, I'm just going to kind of throw it to you. I mean, what are some of the things that particularly people of your generation, what do they feel the impacts of economic inequality are?
Well, I think it's important to first say that this isn't something new, and it's something that they say the more things change, the more they stay the same, and there's always comparison between income classes, and income inequality has led to, it's led to revolutions in the past. But I think the difference now partially is the social media aspect of it. And it's maybe we can talk about these later, and it's different than something like the French Revolution or something like that in terms of the sheer inequality. And but today you're seeing the keeping up with the Joneses, and you can see not only keeping up with the Joneses has been a term for decades, and it used to be your neighbors is who it was. The Joneses were your neighbors, the people next door to you that got a nicer car or something of that sort. But now with social media, especially Instagram, the Joneses can be anybody you want it to be. It can be someone in a different state, different country. It can be a celebrity. It can be somebody, a coworker of yours, and you say, "Oh, well, I don't see them normally outside of work, but on social media, it looks like they're living a lot better life than I am." And it just exacerbates that whole keeping up with the Joneses, trying to compare yourself to people that are similar to you or people you want to be like.
Well, Sam, I think you're absolutely right about that, particularly in regards to social media and Instagram. You picked on a little bit. I'll pick on another. Their parent company, Facebook, can say that it's just the same there. It's
It is just more different generations.
Yeah. So when you take a look at Facebook's with old farts like me, that's where they are. Actually, I don't even really pay much attention to my Facebook account. I spend more time on Instagram, and I don't spend a lot of time on both. But there is a lot of that, a lot of sort of. Gee whiz, look how great my life is. Because of course, no one's going to post hey, look at me doing the laundry. Look at me cleaning out the litter box. That's not what people want their friends to see. They want their friends to see sort of the fantasy or the illusion that is their life. And I always find it kind of comical when someone's at a dinner and it's a nice dinner and they take a picture of what they're eating and saying, "Just enjoying a drink out with my sweetie," or something along those lines. I'm going, you're not enjoying a damn thing. What you're doing is, you're out there messing around social media, trying to prove how great your life is. So you're right about that. But one of the things that I've noticed about income inequality or economic inequality, wealth inequality, just inequality just in general is, it happens in all societies. And just because wealth or economic inequality is wide in one country doesn't mean that there's not economic opportunity. And likewise, just if there is economic or income wealth inequality is narrowed in some countries, that doesn't mean that there is good economic equality. I mean, economic opportunity. For instance, Belarus has a very low Gini coefficient, very low Gini coefficient, but it's a very poor country. Kosovo has a
Yeah,
very, very low Gini coefficient, but it's a very poor country.
and that's
Conversely,
pretty common.
yeah,
Generally, a lower Gini coefficient, there's only one way to get it, and it's to make everybody poor.
Cuba has a low Gini coefficient. Yeah, I would imagine if North Korea would let anyone in, they would have a weird looking Gini coefficient because everyone would have nothing and the Kim family would have everything. So it's either you take out the Kim family, and then you have some wealthy societies like the United States and even certain Western European countries where, the coefficients actually kind of widen out, particularly over the last 20, 30 years, as we've gone from sort of a manual labor-based economy, sort of capital intensive, to a more knowledge-based economy. That's where we're seeing the economic opportunities sort of widen out in a lot of ways. I would argue that perhaps when the founding fathers were starting this country, that the knowledge gap between the unskilled and skilled workers was relatively minimal. It wasn't. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, Jefferson was a pretty bright guy. People that worked on his plantation probably didn't have the economic opportunities. Clearly didn't. So, however, now with the compounding of technology and knowledge over the decades, the most learned in our society are have vastly more skills than the uneducated and unskilled. So I would say that's a huge chunk part of the problem here these days.
Yeah, and I mean, your example, Thomas Jefferson. I mean, picture him with the modern internet and the ability to expand his knowledge well beyond what they were able to at that time. And so there were very smart people. They were more limited by their resources than people are now, and so that does kind of widen it. And I think, I mean, you look at America and like you mentioned, some of the countries that have a much lower Gini coefficient than we do, and like you pointed out, these necessarily aren't countries that we want to equate ourselves to. And I think, to me, it goes towards the opportunities that are presented and the opportunities available to people to better themselves. And I mentioned it once, but I mean, what was so bad about some previous eras, I like talking about the French Revolution, is how punitive the taxes were in the situation was towards the lower class compared to what it is now. The people in the third kind of class in France during the time were essentially unable to better themselves because of the amount of taxes they were paying compared to the upper two classes in France. And so that, to me, is a completely different dynamic than what we experience here in America. And that, yes, there is income inequality, but you have opportunity. There is equal opportunity, I would say, or at least for the most part, to better yourselves, where the real issue, to me, in the real time where you start to see this strife and revolution and, violent uproars, is when it's to the point where, okay, we are the lower class and we can't help ourselves. You are essentially punishing us for being the lower class.
Yeah, and that's the problem ultimately when you come down to economic inequality. And people in the upper income quintile or quartile, whatever you want to say, top 5, 15, 20, 25%, it doesn't matter. You can sit there and say, it's opportunities. You need to exploit them. However, when you take a look at and imagine yourself being in the bottom quintile in terms of income, you could very easily think, man, I can't get out of here. Even if I could sit there and point to ways that you could get out, you have become economically disenfranchised. You have quit buying into the system because largely you are seeing through social media, you're seeing on the television, you're seeing, if you have access to the internet, you're seeing the disparity of wealth in our country, and people think, I'm getting screwed. And that's the problem with income inequality here in the United States. It's not that if you work hard, you can succeed. You can. It's not that, there are ways of getting an education. There are ways of getting, a skill. You can sit there and say, I mean, you can talk to contractors and subcontractors saying, we can't find any masons. We can't
Sure.
find any welders. We can't find any plumbers. We can't find any electricians. These are all things that don't require, an MBA or a doctorate in order to do so. This just requires a little effort, a little willingness to, you know, to do the work in order to get the training. And yet, for whatever reason, these opportunities are going unused by a lot of, semi and unskilled people in the United States. And it's, where is the communication gap? Like, why is this information not getting through? Why are these skills that the economy needs, why are they going untapped, or we can't find them, and yet we still have a number of people who have become disenfranchised and economically unequal. And that's something that's a real head scratcher for me.
And it's I think something that's been years and decades in the making is the minimization of trade schools and vocations. And you know it is a extremely valid career. If their options are to go to a trade school and learn a trade, say become a plumber, or their other option is to go to a college and get a degree they don't really want to get in the first place. Okay, if they're making money from 18 to 22 as a plumber versus taking out debt for those 4 years, I mean, I know plumbers that are making 50 to $100 an hour. That's pretty good money for something that, it may be something that someone wants to do or would enjoy working with their hands. But we have just pushed the need for everybody to have a college degree. Like we have, it's essentially viewed similarly to a GED. It's something you have to have. You have to have your GED. Well, you have to have your college degree now, is really what it's become. And it's been now looked down upon to not go and get your 4-year degree, essentially.
Well, and it's something that it doesn't seem as though our K through 12 across the country is doing a very good job sort of addressing, because talking about vocational skills and talking about apprenticeships and, learning how to be a mason, that goes counter to what the educational establishment is preaching here in the United States. So it is not in really public education's best interest at this point in time, the way things are structured, to go out and push folk tech, because it would cause the loss of current jobs. But that might be a topic for another discussion. I'm afraid we're going down a slippery slope there. And heading back to into income inequality, I would say really the impact of it really, and we've touched on this, is really the biggest problem and the biggest impact income and wealth inequality has, in my estimation, here in the United States and in other countries, is just overall social cohesion. And when people feel as though they're not getting screwed, that the system is not against them, that there are opportunities to get out, they are more likely to pull in the same direction. They're more likely to put their heads down, nose to the grindstone, and say, by God, I'm going to do something about this in a positive way. However, if you have gotten to a point where you have been on social media, you have believed the lies people are telling you, at least I believe them to be lies, and you see just the vast gaps in wealth and income in the United States, it's very understandable why people are saying, heck with it. I can't do anything about it. I'm not able to do this. I'm not able to get ahead. The system is rigged. And so that's the problem. That's one of the biggest impacts of income inequality. It's not necessarily that there aren't opportunities. It's just the social cohesion, the social fabric of society breaks down when more people believe that they simply can't get ahead. Like you mentioned with the French Revolution, like what we see in the Russian Revolution, and a lot of what have been called sort of Western revolutions as opposed to Eastern revolutions, where people feel as though they can't get ahead. And that's when social cohesion is broken down.
And just add on top of that, you mentioned Russia and France, and, a big issue during that time was, the upper class and the king and queen, how much money they were spending. And they go, well, we're paying all the taxes and you're living extremely lavishly as our economy is in the dumps. And now expand that to today, where you have people posted every day that Amazon stock is up or Apple stock is up, and they go, Jeff Bezos made $4 billion today, and I'm in no better spot than I was yesterday. In fact, I know people that have lost their jobs over the past year, and Bezos has made this many billions of dollars. It's that magnified. What I mentioned with the kings and queens and how much they were spending, and it just adds to that strife. And I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't feel like there should be punitive damages done to Jeff Bezos for owning his own company. However, when you're shown that every day, how much more successful someone is getting when their company is growing, where you and the people around you are hurting, it just kind of adds to it, for whether it should or not. But I think it's a reality.
Yeah, and I would listen. I get it, and frankly, I get maybe some of the envy. I mean, I understand why people might be envious of that. I mean,
Well,
here,
who wouldn't? Who?
yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, and his ex-wife pocketed what, 30, $50 billion?
Something like that.
In stock, of course, it's not cash. And when people say he makes this money, it's, that's how much his wealth has gone up. His balance sheet has gone up. His income stream is actually quite low.
He makes what, at less than $100,000 a year salary?
$80,000 the last time I checked. That's what his salary is from the company, with no stock options or anything like that at this point in time. There's no need for it. So he's not even taking money out of the company. I mean, he's just watching the stock go up. So, but kind of mentioning, going back to the impact on society and the tear in the fabric of social cohesion. When you have that, then you have undoubtedly more civil strife, more riots, more protests, and more crimes, a higher crime rate. And we've seen that over the last couple of years.
Of course.
Even as the economy was growing over the last 4 years, even as the poverty level fell to its lowest level ever in 2019, to 10.5%. That's the lowest historical poverty rate in the United States, lowest. Median household income was at its highest level ever in 2019. By all measures, life was getting better in the United States, and still there was the perception that people were getting screwed.
Well, take this. Say you go back 121 years, you go to 1900, and everyone's relatives from then, and you tell them your great grandkids will be 9 times wealthier than you right now. You think most people go, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I mean, the level of wealth that our total country has expanded, or really the developed world, the amount of wealth that has been created and expanded over the last 120 plus years has been pretty phenomenal. The lower class now are infinitely better off than the lower class were 100 plus years ago. And that, that's not to minimize the struggles of the lower class. However, we're experiencing more strife now than we probably were in any period then, when they were 1/9 as wealthy as they are now.
Yeah, and you touched on something, and and I think the problem that a lot of us, or a lot of people, have with income inequality is the engendering of what I would call a permanent underclass of people. That's where the true income or economic inequality is. This permanent underclass of people, these people that grow up in sections of town where no one works, where no one really goes to school. If they go to school, they're just kind of pushed along, where high levels of illegitimacy and teen pregnancy. And that's just, people go through this generation after generation. I'm not saying this is not necessarily a huge segment of our society, but it's a sizable segment of our society. And I would argue that the solutions are out there for this, to take care of this, to take care of a lot of our problems, or at least increase the opportunities out there. And that would be to promulgate or otherwise enact legislation which would encourage, marriage, which would encourage traditional household structure, which would place much greater emphasis on education and all of this. It's not going to be a get out of jail in 3 years times. I mean, I'm using the Monopoly reference, or where things are going to get better in 5 years. We're talking about it's taking us generations to get into this problem. It's going to take generations to get out of it.
Sure.
So when I'm sitting there hearing about this and seeing this, and something, Americans have a sense of fairness And that's why maybe income inequality bothers us a lot more than would, say, a German or a Russian or something like that. We have a sense of fairness that's just part of our culture, that it doesn't seem fair to us that a Jeff Bezos has a net worth that will probably at some point exceed $1 trillion. And then even so, you can go to sections of Birmingham in the public housing areas and just see complete economic disenfranchisement. And that just kind of goes against our sense of fairness here. However, I would say that we have enacted legislation and developed public institutions which are the problem, as opposed to the private enterprise system, which creates opportunity. So
that is an important point, and I think you need to look at it in terms of how the whole pie is growing versus if you have a small sliver of a pie, but that pie gets bigger and bigger, your slice of that pie is still getting bigger. And we've mentioned Jeff Bezos, and he's kind of usually the biggest target because of the size of his company and the concentration of it that he still owns. Without that company, a lot of people would also be not as well off. Amazon has the amount that it's added to our GDP is phenomenal. I mean, it's a second largest employer in the country. I mean, take Walmart too. Take any of the Walton family. I mean, they're all on the same boat. You take these away, and there's a lot of the whole pie shrinks, and the small pieces of pie are getting even smaller as well. And you're never going to have growth, just in some areas of it. You got to focus, I think, on the overall, GDP per capita and how much that total pie is growing. Not to ruin that reference or overdo it.
Well, you're right. And, Sam, I would say that anyone listening to this can say that, hey, you guys were born rounding second base or even rounding third base. Okay, fair enough. Maybe I won't dispute that. Maybe I will, but okay, fine. If that's the argument. However, I would sit there and say, I would counter with that by saying, there's solutions to our problems, which we will get into next week, more solutions in our third segment here on income and economic inequality. But I would agree with them that the impact that we're having here is the focus on the economic inequality, income inequality, is the destruction in societal cohesion. Sam, would you say that that's fair?
Absolutely.
And then I would say this decrease in societal cohesion almost intuitively, not almost, but intuitively, will lead to an increase in crime, and increasing what we will find is an increase of property crime.
Yep.
And I think we've been seeing that over the last couple of years. So that's what I perceive to be the biggest problem, because here in the US, there are tons of opportunities. There still are the economic opportunities, tons of them. There are opportunities that are going unfilled or taken by people that come streaming across our borders. Discussion for another time. So there's plenty of it out there. It's how do we get those opportunities down to those people, those American citizens that need them the best. And that'll be the topic for really part 3 of this.
Yep. That's a longer discussion.
That is a longer discussion. Well, guys, thank you all so much for listening. I'm not exactly sure if we solved the problem here, but I think we agreed that really the impact here is detrimental to our society as a whole, not necessarily our economic potential for economic growth, but really our societal fabric. That is the biggest impact that income and economic inequality has. And obviously, terrorism, our social fabric and social cohesion have the potential to bring down the country, truthfully. As is evidence from just historical examples, the revolutions that we all have read about in history class. But we love to hear from you also. If you have any questions or comments, by all means, please drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakwood.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. If you're interested in reading more, or hearing more, seeing more of what we have to say or think, by all means, please go to oakwood.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab. Play around in there. There's a whole bunch of good stuff in there. As always, I'm going to let Sam have one last take.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got to do, too. Y'all take care.